Enrichment, Enlightenment, Transformation. Rabbi Yisroel Cotlar, the spiritual leader of Chabad of Cary, North Carolina, guides anyone who has been searching for a meaningful life and conscious living. Join our discussions about the mundane, our daily activities, and then infuse every day with a spiritual twist from the inspired sages of the Talmud and Jewish mysticism, which many call Kabbalah. We learn from the root source of all religious monotheistic traditions and delve into the symbolism and levels of meaning from biblical stories.
Those that might be listening anywhere in the world, thank you for tuning in, joining us. March 8th, 2016, the 28th of Adar. And today's topic is how important is it what other people think?
That's a good subject.
How important is it, if you're doing the right thing, or at least you think you are, what sort of impression that leaves on other people? And we're going to begin with the Torah portion, but expand that into Jewish law, Jewish spirituality, and many other areas. Because on one hand, you would think that in Judaism, Abraham was called Avram HaIvri. Abraham Ivri. Ivri means on the other side. Now, that's the first term for Jew in the Torah, Ivri, on the other side. And literally used because he came from the other side of the river, he crossed Mesopotamia. But it also means that he was on the other side of the world. People believed one thing, and he was the only one that believed something else. He made a line in the sand, said, you guys might be here, I am embarking upon a different path. He did not mind being unpopular. He did not mind going against what everyone else thought to what he believed is right. And certainly, you can say in Judaism there is a lot about that. Not following the trend, not worrying about what other people think, not being self-conscious. Indeed, I would say being too self-conscious can be a very negative trait. Okay. There is the danger, though, of going the opposite extreme as well. And that is what actually today's class is going to be about. Impression. Making an impression. And I'll begin with a very odd statement in Ethics of Our Fathers. Do you have a paper there? Yes. Pirkei Avot, Ethics of Our Father, and I want to begin with this, and then we will zoom into the Torah portion afterwards. But this is the quote in Ethics of Our Fathers. Brian, why don't you begin?
He would also say, one who is pleasing to his fellow man is pleasing to God, but one who is not pleasing to his fellow man is not pleasing to God.
You want to know what God thinks of you? What do other folks think of you? Okay, I mean that's essentially what this statement. And Pirkei Avot are a lot of the one-liners of the sages who lived in the Talmudic era. There are a lot of famous lines. If I'm not for myself, who am I? You know, there are a lot of famous lines in Pirkei Avot. And here we have a line. You want to know what God thinks of you? How do other people think of you? So at face value, I see Pam is going like this. At face value, we have some surprises. Is Judaism encouraging us to be people pleasers?
Yeah.
But normally, I would think not.
Correct. So what is the meaning of this statement? It is odd. And in Hebrew, kol ruach habriot nocha hamenu. It translates, it's a literal translation. If people like you, then ruach hamakom, the spirit of God is happy with you. And if not, that's a sign that the spirit of God is unhappy with you. What is the meaning of that? It's odd. It is odd.
I mean, Donald Trump's the perfect example.
Well, I would say yeah, but
Well,
I would not. I don't want to go political, but plenty of people have very strong feelings against him as
But
well.
many people also vote for him, so you can't say that.
But I mean,
Correct. But I just finished saying Abraham. If you took Abraham's popularity when he began his career, Abraham, it was very, very low. He clearly took a different position, and what we are expected to do as Jews is be willing to take a very different position from everyone, despite the ramifications of people being unhappy with our position. I think that is one of the great challenges of today, being able to take a different position. What then is the meaning of this statement in Ethics of Our Fathers? Now you might say I just copied and pasted. No, I did not. This is the entire statement. Then it goes on to something else. Now, it's not the only line in Ethics of Our Fathers that touches upon that idea. I want to fast forward to chapter 2 of Ethics of Our Fathers, and I'm going out of order. It's on the third page of this
But wait, are you
handout.
going back to this?
Yeah, don't worry.
Oh, okay.
I put together this class, so it's a little different than most weeks. I put together these sources. It was a challenge. We've been discussing the Mishkan for 3 weeks now. So I wanted something a little bit different. We're going to go back to the Mishkan in a moment, but I thought this is it has a lot of ramifications on life today. Another statement from Pirkei Avot, third page here, chapter 2, and read, Rabbi Yehuda Hanasi, Rabbi Yehuda the Prince said,
What is the proper path a person should choose for himself? Whatever brings glory to himself and grants him glory before others.
Okay, another statement from Pirkei Avot. Now, don't read the Rebbe's interpretation on that. Save that for later. I want to raise the question first. You want to know what the proper path is? Now, I would think the answer to that question is, what does the Torah say, right?
Right.
He says, what will bring glory to yourself and glory to other people? Is that what we're looking for? What other people will, again, think of what we do? So clearly, both of these statements have to be understood better because it runs contrary to so much in Yiddishkeit, so much in Judaism about doing what is right regardless of popular opinion. Okay. Let us now, with that in mind, let us dive into the Parsha. The Torah portion is the last of 4 that discuss the building of the Mishkan. What it does is it goes through how the Jews built everything, and Moshe, like the IRS in April, take an inventory. What kind of inventory? Every single piece of gold or silver that was contributed. He is as transparent as any organization has ever been. Let's begin. Pam, read from our Parsha. These are the numbers. Start from the name. The name of the Parsha is Pikudei. It means numbers.
Oh, back on page 1.
And now we're back on page 1.
These are the numbers of the Mishkan of the testimony, which were counted at Moses' command. This was the work of the Levites under the direction of Ithamar, the son of Aaron and Cohen. All the gold that been used for the work and all the work of the gold of the waving was 29 talents, 730 shekels, according to the holy shekel. The silver of the community numbers was 100 talents and 1,775 shekels, according to the holy shekel.
And it continues, the bronze was this, and they make a calculation of every item. And this is really odd. The last couple of weeks I asked, why does the Torah have to give us every detail of the construction of the temple? Here, it's not even the construction. It was how many cents were donated. But Moshe did that. He went in front of the entire Jewish people and he said, I find it fascinating that we know how many pounds of gold. One of the things I failed to do in preparation of this class is to know how much a talent is. I'd be interested to know how much this is worth. How much is a talent? Kikar, Amnon, the word in Hebrew is a kikar. I don't know what the modern day equivalent is.
Kikar is a square.
But it's a biblical measurement.
Oh.
And if someone can,
Oh, nachon, kikar lechem. You said a piece of the bread, kikar lechem. That's
correct.
Right. Yeah.
Here, though, it's 29 kikarim of gold and then 730 shekels according to the holy shekel. I don't know how much a kikar is. I mean, this is a significant amount of gold. It'd be very interesting to run it against what gold is running per ounce today and to know how much. Again, there's a lot of Jews there. We can see what the average donation was. There's a lot of ways we can run this, but a talent. What is the biblical talent? Anyone running anything up?
Yeah, it's, this is useful. 60 minas.
How much is a mina?
Apparently that weighs in at just under 76 pounds.
Each kikar.
Wow, that's a lot.
So 76, a kikar is 76 pounds, goodness. And there were 29 kikars of gold. So 76 times 29. And then times that by ounces. and then times that by the price per ounce. So
A lot.
it's a lot of money. But what is fascinating is, I only here attached the first paragraph, but Moshe makes a calculation of how everything was used. The menorah, just to give you an example, was about 1 kikar of gold. So this is 29 total. It's a lot of gold. Some they melted down. Okay. So the midrash, and someone asked Anne, that is the in the oral tradition, okay,
Hold on a second. 76 pounds?
is each kikar,
I think so.
and now we have 29 kikars of gold. Let's just worry about the gold. The silver will. So 29 times 76 is how many pounds of gold?
I don't know, but I want to calculate.
Okay, don't get distracted too much. You've got the rest of the class.
So I found another reference where it's 120 pounds. So it's a lot either way.
120.
Yeah, it could be 60 pounds or 120.
All right, so
by
even
this reference, but it's a lot.
Rabbi,
Yes.
I was running it on the internet, and it says the Torah says that the menorah for the Mishkan was made of 1 kikar of gold.
correct.
And
So the
there are,
menorah was 1 kikar of gold.
yeah, and it says that there are 3,000 shekels in the in a kikar, according to the Chazon Ish, and so it's about 1,530 ounce.
Right.
A lot.
It's a lot. So even if we did the 70 pounds, let's say, okay, you can do how much that is.
100 pounds. Let's be in the
100 pounds? Okay,
Well,
100
because-
pounds? Okay.
Because one is 76, one is
Okay, let's go
100.
further, guys. It's 290 pounds of gold. What's 290 pounds of gold worth? That's the question.
2,900 pounds.
Oh, 2,900 pounds of gold. Wow. And each pound is 16 ounces. Okay. But again, if you times it by the number of Jews there, perhaps it is not that extraordinary. In any event.
No, because it's not by the number of Jews. It's because they had a finite amount of gold when they left.
That's a lot of gold.
Yeah, but it says in the Parsha last week when the Jews actually contributed, remember, Moshe had to tell them to stop. It was the one fundraising drive in history where they had too much money. But let's go to what the Midrash, and in the oral tradition, there's 2 parts of the oral tradition. There is the legal side of the oral tradition, which tells us the details of mitzvot, details of Jewish laws that are not mentioned specifically in the verse. And it will tell us that an eye for an eye is not literal, but it refers to finality. And then there is the oral tradition on the stories of the Torah. And tell us behind the scenes information or lessons. Not all of these need to be literal, the midrashim on the Torah. But this midrash writes, why is Moshe why is there this internal audit? Now you might say it's good practice of any nonprofit to do that. But would people really accuse Moshe of stealing? Maybe you would say with all the kvetching that the Jews did,
Right.
maybe.
There's always going to be one.
Oh, but the Medrash writes something else, right? Janice, please read.
The Medrash
Medrash Tanchuma.
Tanchuma.
Yeah.
For it is a man's duty to be free of blame before men as before God, as it is said, and be guiltless toward God and toward Israel.
Interesting verse. Be guiltless towards God and towards Israel. Now, you might think if I'm guiltless towards God, I must be doing pretty good, right? Well, it says be guiltless towards God and to people. There is something important about not being looking guilty to people, even in the instance where you did nothing wrong. So,
because you want to avoid the lashon hara. You
Correct.
want to avoid the discussions and the
murmuring and the
rumoring and doubt and all that can be. You want to put things in the clear so
Well-
people don't sin. Basically.
right.
Well, also, I think, plain and simple, it's not good for society
Yes.
to doubt the integrity of your leaders.
Beautiful.
Yeah.
Absolutely.
That's it.
That's
Absolutely. And it's funny because on one hand, I'll say Torah is a double standard. On one hand, we are told not to judge people, not to overly judge people, right? Judge people favorably. On the other hand, we ourselves are told to do things that avoid suspicion, do things that avoid rumors, do things that avoid, people thinking you're guilty, even if you are actually blameless towards God. And that is the meaning of this verse. So it could be as simple as people have to have trust in the leaders, but this is seen more broadly in Jewish tradition as a source of not doing something to create a impression that is faulty. Okay. And
This,
Moshe's calculating every ounce of gold, silver, and even copper is seen as a biblical, so, and the fact that the Torah dedicates really valuable real estate, a lot of words towards that, is to teach us this lesson. It is important, especially in leadership position, but in any position, to not only live with integrity, but to do things that avoid suspicion. So I have now here, what we're going to do is where this is true in nonprofits, where this is true in other areas of Torah, and finally, what I want to dedicate most of the time to is beyond the legal dimension of this law, what it's really about in Jewish spirituality. So let us begin with some examples. These are all from Talmud or the Code of Jewish Law. Here goes. This is interesting. Brian.
The similar examples?
In the service of the Holy Temple, yes.
Right.
This is from the Talmud, yeah.
One whose hair is braided should not separate from the collections, so that he isn't suspected of hiding some of the monies in his braids. It was taught that they would comb the braids. It was taught they would talk to him from the moment he entered the room where the money was stored to the moment he exited.
In other words, that he doesn't hold any in his mouth.
Why don't we have him fill his mouth with water? Because of the bracha. We find in Torah, in Nevi'im and Kittaim, that a person must give no cause for suspicion to other people, just as he must give no cause for suspicions for God. In the Torah it says, and be guiltless towards the Lord and towards Yisroel. In Kittaim it says, so shall you find favor and good understanding in the sight of God and humanity.
Okay, so that's the extreme. The shekalim, by the way, was this coin that everyone would have to give every year as a yearly tax. And those in charge of the shekalim would not have long hair. Interesting. This is one example. I think the Talmud's example here is interesting. And
The families that were in charge of baking the showbread for the Holy Temple would never eat white bread in their homes, so that people could not say that they had pilfered some of the temple's flour.
they were in charge of baking bread. And I guess in those days, again, this is societal over here. This is not the importance here is the value, not the details of the law. But in those days, perhaps white bread was rare. Oh, I know what they did. They took some of the temple's bread and they're using it for themselves, Next.
The families that were in charges of grinding and preparing the incense would not use any perfume at all, so they could not be suspected of using the incense of the temple.
Okay. So it continues here. So that is one example. Then in the Code of Jewish Law, there are actually laws about tzedakah. I'll just paraphrase this because of time. And it says that, collectors of charity in the old days, people would go like door to door and they would collect money for important causes. They should work in pairs. It should be distributed by a group of 3. And then it says, why do we not require a bet-in of 23 when distributing tzedakah funds? Well, by the time you gather 23 people, the poor person might be. So, but ideally it wouldn't be a bad idea, but we don't need all the discussions and all the back and forths when the guy is in need of food, of bread. But another example of where in Jewish law it is like this.
And what is the significance of 23?
So interesting. In the court system, there were 3 types of court in biblical Israel. Little towns had a court of 3. There were always odd numbers because you vote.
You don't have time.
Right. Little towns had 3. Medium, and this was your large cities actually, medium to large, 23 judges. Today, what's a jury today? What's a jury today? How many is a jury today?
12 angry men.
12.
It's 12? A jury's an even number, really?
Yeah, that's good because juries have to be
And they have some
unanimous.
alternatives.
Juries used to have to be unanimous.
Do they?
Oh yeah.
Yeah.
Oh, I did not know that.
Yeah, because it's the state against you, and you want to be sure. So yeah.
Oh.
Or you've got a
If you-
hung jury.
I've never done jury duty.
Yeah.
Ah.
But yeah, for the state it has to be unanimous, so you don't need an odd number.
Okay, I did not know that.
Yep.
So there's 12. The number was 23, and the one exception was in Jerusalem. There was one bet-in that had 70, and that was the one that was dealing on national issues. But your average town's bet-in, the large ones that had the power even of capital cases, were 23. So
I mean, it would be very hard to get a decision.
That's what
it
it's-
took years.
So that's why it says when it comes to distribution of tzedakah, we don't want to do that to delay the distribution. However, ideally, there's something very beautiful about that. A couple other examples coming up. They should not convert the foreign currency themselves. Rather, they should use a third party to do so. It's interesting, even in those days, there were currencies. And finally, they have to be careful not to be biased to a family member when doing it. So we see in Jewish law, there is tremendous importance given to transparency, specifically with tzedakah money. And where do we learn this from? Even Moses. If Moshe needed it, if Moses needed it, everyone needs it. And it isn't just because maybe the person is wrong. It's also to have everyone trust the system, not gossip, so on and so forth. Okay. Some of these with the braids might seem, very extreme. Perhaps when it came to the Holy Temple, they had an even higher level of standards than your average synagogue did.
And assuming someone must have stolen money in their braids.
Maybe over there, since everything was to an extreme, they just, you had to have.
It's not that, it's that they could.
Well, maybe it's
Just
like most of the rules in baseball. They make the rule because somebody was doing something they oughtn't.
Right.
Well, that's what she was saying.
Yeah. Correct. All right. Now, what's interesting, that was as far as money goes. I'm now going to a different area of Jewish law, and some of you might have heard this. It's called marat ayin. Marat ayin means, don't ayin in Hebrew means eye, okay? If it looks bad to other people, ra means
Rise and bad.
bad.
Yeah.
Bad eye. This is not evil eye. That's not what we're talking about. That's ayin hara. Marat ayin means,
What is marat again?
like ra. It's from the word of
yeah,
ra.
and ayin is on.
Eye.
Yeah,
But this is different than the word
Right.
evil eye, which
Right.
is ayin hara.
Uh-huh.
This is the same root words, but it's called marat ayin. And marat ayin means when doing something that is right in Jewish, even ritual areas of life, not just financial, but ritual areas of life, be careful not to create an impression that is wrong.
I like this first example.
So look at the first, this is
I
from
didn't know
the
that.
code of Jewish law. Now, today, this is all societal. Let me explain. Marat ayin is societal. It can change because whatever, so where are we up to in the reading? Anne, read the first one, in kashrut.
If one cooks and eats milk and almond milk, one should place almonds in an area so that no one should think he is transgressing the prohibition of cooking and eating meat and milk together.
So they had almond milk back then. It's very
That
interesting.
is
Today,
very-
it's very in style. But the code of Jewish law says, be careful. Now, notice I put in brackets here. This is a modern day posek, and he says today he allows the kosher restaurants, and this is the chief Sephardic rabbi of Israel. He actually passed away last year. His son is currently the chief Sephardic rabbi in Israel. But he allows the restaurants to have non-dairy creamer with coffee served at meat meals because nowadays non-dairy creamers are considered normal and regular. So it would not need that. But perhaps for a time you would have to show the container.
Yeah.
Why? So people shouldn't be gossiping and you should, So it's an interesting law that even though there is no problem, I'll give you another example of where this applies in kashrut that I have to deal with all the time. Anyone know what that is? I'm a kosher consumer. What do I have to worry about when it comes to marat ayin? People ask me all the time to, let's have a meeting in a non-kosher restaurant. Okay, this is an issue that comes up all the time. So one of the laws of marat ayin is someone that is clearly walking around as I am, very easily noticeable as a Jew and a kosher consumer. I will not even have a coffee, let's say, which I will have a coffee at Starbucks, but I will, and I'll get to why Starbucks is different in a moment, even though the coffee is not the problem, but if I am having the non-kosher drink the kosher drink in a non-kosher restaurant, just me walking in creates an impression.
Yeah.
The impression could be the rabbi doesn't keep kosher,
Right.
or the impression would be that this is a kosher restaurant. I don't know which one it would be, but there's the worry of creating that impression. And you might say, we're in the South and no one knows anyways, or most people don't keep kosher anyways. I still don't do it. Now, when it comes to places that are known as it's normal to go and just have a cup of coffee,
Yeah.
such as a coffee shop, I don't worry about that. And I've spoken to people, my rabbis, about that. That's different. Yes, Starbucks also serves the ham sandwiches. They do today. But if someone comes in, you're not assuming they're going to have the ham sandwich. There's a good reason to believe They're just having a drink.
Vegetarian.
Correct. Most people, however, don't go. McDonald's does serve coffee.
It's not-
And if I ever was on the road and I needed one, I'll do it maybe a drive-through. I don't know. They're
Yeah, it's actually pretty
yeah.
decent coffee.
Exactly.
But you don't put milk on your coffee.
But that
Well, he could
that's a,
put-
but that's a different. But I'm just talking about the issue of walking into a non-kosher
Right.
restaurant. For me, that's an issue of maratayin, and I deal with this very often. I'll even say there was a beautiful event by the Federation last night that I wanted to go to, and just giving this as an example, but it was at a non-kosher restaurant or place. There's a woman speaking from Donetsk, who was that area in Ukraine. I'm just giving an example, and it was unfortunate. Usually they have a kosher option. As long as there's a kosher option, then I'm one of the we're one of the sponsoring organizations, and I would want to be I would have wanted to go last night. This is an issue of maratayin, actually, of going into, was at a restaurant or a place where everything is not kosher. So that actually is an area in kashrut that I deal with up until today. So that's one area.
But is there a kosher restaurant anywhere
In this area, there's not a fully kosher restaurant.
No.
But that doesn't change the law,
No.
just means that you always have to cook.
Well, that's about kosher, yeah. But what we're talking about here is even
Where you
even
go.
the impression. And it's odd. Who
It's
cares
not
about
so
the
odd,
impression?
No, because you by
I
doing
represent.
that, not only you represent, but if somebody else sees you, you're inciting them to speak lashon hara,
Correct.
and that is, in other words, they will be sinning because of your actions.
Correct. So there's multiple levels here. There's a stumbling
Yeah.
block in front of a blind,
Yeah.
encouraging sin,
Yeah.
and there's just, oh wow, no one keeps kosher in town. Even the rabbi doesn't. I'm just
Right.
giving an example, and that lowers the overall kosher. There could be many parts of that, and a lot of times I'm in these gray areas where, like for instance, there have been times if it's clearly after a restaurant's hours and they have an event, we've done things that like regardless and things like that. But that's after the hours and then it's a private party. That's a little bit different. I don't want to go into the details of that, but it is. I wanted you to know it's something that I have to deal with. And all right, this is an interesting one. Look in marriage, Pam.
Yeah.
Do this next one.
If one witness testifies to a man's death, thus permitting the woman to remarry, the witness may not marry the woman. If he would marry her, people would likely spread rumors that he in truth did not see the husband die and gave false testimony about the husband's death so that he could marry the wife.
There's a
It's
lot
like a
of
murder
faith
mystery.
in this.
There is, okay, but and this is actually an important law, as you know. There's there's a big area in Jewish law if a guy goes missing, and how that would affect her because she's married and is she allowed to marry someone else, and there are a lot of times where they'll have what kind of evidence is enough that someone died. Unfortunately, like in September 11th, this happened, and
Oh my.
then there was reason. I mean, this is contemporary. Obviously, they're the rabbis, but they did go together, and
Was there a bet in that?
yeah, and there was,
settled the matter?
and unfortunately, there's enough reason to assume that the person had perished. But what about in the old days where someone went overseas and on a business and they're never seen again?
Wonder.
And today, it's, there's communication.
Yeah.
Someone disappeared. Well, what you would have someone come from overseas, by the way, and man, woman, either one testifies, I saw this person passed away, and that would be enough. This was the one area of Jewish law where one person was enough. He didn't need two. Interesting. But that one person couldn't go afterwards and marry that woman.
What would happen in a situation of MIA where they?
Correct.
You'd have to wait.
So very interesting. In biblical times, there was a tradition that before a guy went to war, if they knew it was a dangerous war, they would write a conditional divorce.
Oh, nice.
Oh,
Nice.
wow.
In the event they went missing, it would be retroactively a divorce. Very interesting.
Mm.
Very interesting about that. That's a yes.
Rabbi, I didn't want to disturb you before, but we need to go back to the kashrut thing.
Okay.
And Debbie's saying maybe Rabbi needs to wear a large sign, I'm here to listen, not to eat. And then Marty's saying, in New York, some of the people I knew would not eat in a kosher restaurant unless they knew the rabbi who attested to the kashrut. Is that the same?
That already was there. That's a good. That was their personal prerogative that they did whatever the reason they did not trust the regular supervision and they wanted to know personally not the organization, but the individual doing it, that would be their own personal kashrut thing, but that is not a marat ayin issue. Because it's not a big deal. It's a kosher restaurant. We're not worried about what other people think.
Yeah, people think it's very rude.
Correct, because it is a kosher restaurant. That was just their own personal shtick.
Okay.
No, on the contrary, I would say that if there was a restaurant that was a suitable enough level of kashrut for baseline kosher, okay, that even if I personally wouldn't eat everything there, I would be comfortable going inside there because there wouldn't be the issue of marat ayin.
Yeah.
Okay. Now, if, however, there was what is called a kosher style deli, which is completely not kosher, but they sell pastrami on rye with cheese also, right? So it's not only is there a marat ayin, I would actually argue that would be the highest level of marat ayin because that is a place that people often think is kosher anyways. So
it's kind of like why the pig is particularly treif.
Yeah, exactly, because it has,
It's hiding.
yeah, exactly.
Pork is the other white meat, right?
And here is the last law. Just another. There's so many areas of marat ayin in Jewish law, but here's the third example. Where are we up to in the reading? Yeah.
Shabbat. One may not allow workers to build one's home on Shabbat, even if he's currently not occupying it. This is true even when they are contracted by the job and were not instructed to do the work specifically on Shabbat. The reason for this is that people may not be aware of the contractual agreement.
Let me explain that law.
Yeah, because,
On Shabbat, okay,
yeah,
not only are we not supposed to work, but you're not supposed to instruct anyone specifically to do work on your behalf, okay? Even if that person is not obligated in Shabbat, i.e. they are not Jewish.
right.
What is allowed is if you don't pay someone for the hour or for the day, but you pay them for the job, and they can choose, I want to work on Shabbat, I want to work on Sunday, I want to work on month, that kind of arrangement is okay. You are not specifically telling them to work on Shabbat. They're doing it with their own prerogative. I will drop off shirts at the cleaners on Friday and pick it up Monday. I don't care when they work. It's not, they could have worked on Friday on my shirt. They could have worked on Shabbat. I did not instruct them to work on Shabbat. I just said by the time Tuesday comes, I hope the shirt's ready. You see the difference?
Mm-hmm.
So there's a difference in Jewish law whether or not you are clearly having them do a task for you on Shabbat or whether or not they it's a per job. And let me just finish the train of thought. That, you see the differentiation or not,
No, I
Janet?
do, but I don't understand the
So
paragraph.
here's what it says. However, when it comes to something in the public, unlike my cleaner's example, when it's in the public, even if it's per the job, it's still not allowed. Because people don't know the arrangement. People will think, I hired them specifically to do this job on Shabbat. That is the difference between the cleaners or the mail or any other area of law where I'm allowed to have people do work for me on Shabbat because they decided when to do it, versus something seen in the public, such as any work in the house. So work on the house, you have a big truck outside and stuff like that, it looks like you hired them to do work on Shabbat. I know we've gone off subject, your questions, I'm sorry.
Yeah, so what about if, especially in our modern society, if you know that the worker is not Jewish, and their Sabbath is on Sunday?
Correct.
And so I guess by that we should certainly discourage them from work on Sunday, perhaps.
But they're not obligated in the same way.
Okay.
As long as they have some idea of, okay.
So here I think the rule is almost saying I almost can't let a worker work on my house over the whole weekend because I have to have them honor my Sabbath for Marat Ayin, and I shouldn't be encouraging them to violate their Sabbath.
But them working on Sunday, their Saturday, they can do whatever is meaningful to them, like their version of their Sabbath, which is recommended for them to have a day to recharge and to dedicate to family and God, but it doesn't carry with it the same prohibitions.
It's not your responsibility, I don't think, to ensure.
Well, it's a nice thing to let people have a day to do that.
Right.
But yeah, what this law is saying is you don't want the workers doing it on Shabbat because of Marat Ayin.
Okay.
Okay. And Marat Ayins are, because it's only Marat Ayin, there's more wiggle room on some of these laws because it's not an inherent problem. The problem is
The appearance.
impression. So therefore, it depends on the societal, and it's always up for these are things that are more up for review in Jewish law far more than other areas because from the beginning it's only about impression. So
Can I ask one question?
quickly, because then I want to go
It
back.
goes back to the same thing about last week and doctors and nurses. I mean, you don't really have a choice.
My father. So let's save that for afterwards.
Okay.
Doctor, I said last week, medical
Yes.
life-saving stuff can be done on Shabbat, but there is.
But just not going to work for a 12-hour
So
shift.
we'll after class.
Okay.
Okay. So we have 3 areas of Jewish law here that we brought in today's class. We had in nonprofits. We had in well, really we had 2 so far. One was nonprofits, and one was in other ritual areas. But the common denominator here is impressions matter. And one is, we don't want people to gossip. We don't want people to rumor. There's another, let's take this broader though. In the way I live my life, I don't want to do things that make a bad impression. Why? Because people associate me, and I'm just saying, I'm using me as an example, representing Judaism, what it means to be a Jew. That creates an impression. Whether I'm actually right or wrong is one issue, but even if I'm right, I have a responsibility to represent the cause. And not just the causes in Judaism, but also a step further, God. That is why, particularly when a religious individual, on whatever level they are, does something immoral, illegal, it's horrible. The media loves to jump all over those things, right? Because it's bad for the cause. It's bad for the cause. And I'm going to skip the next text for a moment. And I'm going to go to this statement from Pirkei Avot that we began with. Rabbi Yehuda Hanassi said, "What is the proper path a person should follow? Whatever brings glory to himself and grants glory before others." And we began today's class asking, what does that really mean? So the answer to that is as follows. Pirkei Avot is one step beyond basic law. Okay? It is beyond, basic law is what should a person do? What Torah says. Beyond that, there are 2 ways to follow what Torah says. You can do it in a way, I'm doing what's right, and the heck with what everyone else thinks and what other people do. That's one way of doing it. And 2 is, I'm not living on an island. The goal of life is not to get a whatever grade on my report card. It's to make the entire world better. Let's read the way that the Rebbe analyzed. Brian, do this. The Lubavitcher Rebbe on that text.
The right path, obviously, is the path of Torah, but there are 2 ways a person can tread this path. He can walk it as a stranger, or he can choose it as his own. The body of law is fulfilled by simply walking the path. It may be difficult and uncomfortable. It may be a lonely path, scorned by society and a burden even to those who walk it. But as long as they obey its signposts and remain true to its trajectory, they have fulfilled their duty to God and man. But the chassid wants more. He wants the soul. He says to himself, if this is the right path, why don't I desire it with every fiber of my being? If this is the right path, why doesn't the world recognize it as such? Obviously, there is much about myself that requires improvement and development. Obviously, there's much about my world that requires improvement and development.
If I'm walking along the right path and everyone else thinks I'm a lousy individual. Let's go back to the first text we had at the beginning. Remember the very first text we had? Who is pleasing to fellow men is pleasing to God. Mm-hmm. It's not saying we have to be people pleasers. Of course, first and foremost, we have to do the right thing. But when doing the right thing, there are 2 ways of doing it. You can walk in the lonely path, and you can do it in a way where the goal is that people like you. And the ultimate litmus test of how you're doing in our being ambassadors for God is, we should create a following. We should make it right. Yes, Abraham began his trajectory as being on the other side. And he took a stand. And he said, don't care what other people say. But eventually, you are supposed to create an impression. And if a person, after 120 years, I did everything I was supposed to, but I was not pleasing to my fellow men. But that's because they were always wrong and I was always right. Might there be a problem there? Even if you did everything right. You might say, my brother put it this way, not everything that is gold, not everything that glitters is gold. But why shouldn't gold glitter? In other words, when doing the right thing, it is important to care what other people think. It is important to try to create an impression. Yes?
What I keep thinking is, and I understand that you're not to give a misleading impression,
Correct.
or give a good impression, but this the current state of Israel, probably forever, back from the beginning, is to me, and it's just personal, is the one group that really doesn't care what the world thinks, because to survive they have to do what they do. Now, I of course support them. I'm Jewish, but a lot of the world doesn't. So how do you reconcile that you want to create a good impression, but you have to survive, so you have to create a bad impression to some people?
Exists. So that's a very very good question. And obviously, and let's not talk specific. Let's take the question you asked and not discuss specific policies.
Okay.
You know,
Yeah, sure.
but let's say that the conclusion is this is absolutely necessary for our survival. That has to come first. That has to come first. We cannot worry about world impression. But there are still, the ultimate goal should be in a way that is pleasing to other people. The ultimate goal should be in a way that, right? But it can't begin with that. It has to begin with what is right. And it's not just true with Israel, it's true in our own life. We shouldn't walk around self-conscious. Step one is, what does Torah want us to do? Step two should be, how can we sway in a way that's pleasing? And this is an area, I chose this class because I get so frustrated by this as a religious Jew. When I hear stories of religious Jews that are representing the cause so poorly. And it bothers me tremendously.
Yeah, you say the cause, but I think you mean the
Jewish cause. I mean Judaism, Torah, true Judaism. You know, and it bothers me tremendously because, look, there are certain areas of Jewish law that perhaps this is the only way to do it. And there are times in life that it is possible, because of standing up for what you believe is right, you will inevitably turn off, or you will inevitably make some people uncomfortable. That is part of life. But there are so many other times where there are ways to do it in a way that brings people together. There's so many other ways that, you know, and I believe that, I know that, you know, there are a lot of policy issues I have to deal with that are very, very difficult, and part of the hardest parts of my job. And I have to start with what is right, that I believe, according to the laws of the Torah. But I have to do everything I can in every way. I'm just talking personally here, but this refers to everyone. Going back to, we have to be pleasing to our fellow mankind. The first Pirkei Avot, or back to this second Pirkei Avot we have over here. What is the proper path a person should choose? Whatever brings glory, not to yourself, but to what you represent. And I want to do one more text and then take questions.
No, it's not a question, it's just a comment about Israel.
Okay. Let us, on the role of Kiddush Hashem. It's a beautiful text by Jonathan Sachs. Brian, do you mind reading it out loud quickly? And we won't have time.
Do not desecrate my holy name. I must be sanctified among the Israelites. I am the Lord who made you holy and brought you out of Egypt to be your God. I am the Lord. The two commands are respectively the prohibition against desecrating God's name, Hilil Hashem, and the positive corollary, Kiddush Hashem, that we are commanded to sanctify God's name. What are these commands and what do they mean?
Hold it there. Kiddush Hashem is a mitzvah, sanctifying God's name. Chilul Hashem is Bernie Madoff, right? That's desecrating God's name. He's a Jew. What does it mean to desecrate or to sanctify God's name? Why don't we just say God? What's God's name? Keep on reading.
First, we have to understand the concept of name as it applies to God. A name is how we know, or we are to know others. God's name is therefore his standing in the world. Do people acknowledge him, respect him, honor him? The commands of Kiddush Hashem and Chilul Hashem locate that responsibility in the conduct and fate of the Jewish people. This is what Isaiah meant when he said, "You are my witness, says God, that I am God."
I don't know what happened with the keyboard there.
That's okay.
Powerful verse. Isaiah tells the Jewish people, Atem Edai, you are my witnesses. What does that mean, you are my witnesses? Our goal in the world is to testify that there is an existence of a creator and a loving God. There are two ways to prove God's existence. We had an earlier class on this. One is getting in arguments and debating. How effective is that? We had a class on this last year. Not very effective. The other way is living a life where someone says, wow, this is what it looks like when someone is a man of faith or a woman of faith. That is far more effective. So God says, you are my witnesses. Yeah?
The God of Israel is the God of all humanity. He created the universe and life itself. He made us all, Jew and non-Jew alike, in his image. He cares for all of us. His tender mercies are on all of his works. Yet the God of Israel is radically unlike gods in which the ancients believed and the reality in which today's scientific atheists believe. He is not identical with nature. He created nature. He is not identical with the physical universe. He transcends the universe. He is not capable of being mapped by science, observed, measured, quantified. He is not that kind of thing at all. How then is he known? The radical claim of Torah is that he is known, not exclusively, but primarily through Jewish history and through the ways Jews live. As Moses says at the end of his life, ask now about the farmer.
And because of time, I'll read the last couple paragraphs to yourself.
Okay.
And we'll finish with this because of time. To those that are listening online, it's actually a very powerful piece penned by Jonathan Sacks, the former chief rabbi of Israel, on what it means to be ambassadors of God in the world, what it means to represent the cause. And I'll be happy to email anyone the text of this article. You can email me at YC, my initials, at chabadofcary.org, YC@chabadofcary.org. I'll send you a link to this article. But going back to the beginning here, yes, impression is important. Yes, marat ayin is an issue in Jewish law. And yes, in our own lives, step one is what does the Torah say? But step two is how will others see this? Because we have a responsibility, particularly in an era where religion, I believe, is under assault, or religion, some people do things negative in the name of religion. And we have an obligation to do kindness, love, mitzvahs in the name of religion. So we'll hold it there. All right. Thank you, everyone tuning in. And any other questions?
Jonathan Sacks was the head rabbi of
Chief Rabbi of England. He retired a couple years ago, but he was a good spokesman for Judaism in general. And thank you to Nissan Communications for allowing this program to be streamed throughout the world. You can donate to Nissan Communications at the homepage, nissancommunications.com. Have a good week, everyone. We will be back next week.
You are tuned to the Nissan Communications Network. Our weekly lineup of call-in programs includes Computers 2K Now with Amnon Nissan, My Life, My Will with Gisela DiCarlo, The Tanya Love Show, Health Then with Debbie Bruck, Breaking Free with Marilyn Shannon, Triangle Be Well with Howard Jacobson, Lunch and Learn with Rabbi Yisroel Cotlar, Lessons of Vietnam with NCVVI members, Parent Dome with Ryan Miller, Current Affairs with Amnon Nissan. And if you tuned in too late, you can always watch each program in its entirety or download an MP3 audio file of it in the archives section on nissancommunications.com. Don't forget to subscribe to our YouTube channel, follow us on Twitter, and like us on Facebook. Sponsored by Atomos.com, makers of quality video recorders and converters, CarolinaApparel.com, and DeltaForce.net.